Yeah, well, I think we will go ahead and get going here this morning, trying to be respectful of everybody's time. I know everybody's busy. Welcome to our commodity markets basics. We'll call it our 101 course. And this course, the intent of this free webinar, we actually developed this after feedback from some of our other webinars that we've done. The feedback we got was generally, hey, the information's great, but I'm a little bit newer to this business. Um, so a lot of what you said went completely over my head. So can you give me something that's a little bit more basic of how to look at and understand commodity markets? And so that's what we are up to today. We have Paige for Moving Parts in here with us to translate some of the 40 years of experience worth of gibberish that you'll get from me that may make sense in my mind. I've been doing this a while, but Paige has been, you've been at this, what, about 7 years?
Yep.
And so she's got a little bit, she was kind of in maybe some of your shoes a little bit more recently. So she's going to kind of walk us through some of this and help maybe translate some of the things I say. A couple housekeeping items, I guess, first before we get started. Anybody who signed up for the webinar will get an email link to our YouTube channel. We're recording this. So, if anybody signed up for it and missed it, matter of fact, you don't even have to have signed up for it. If you know anybody that you think this may be useful to, you can direct them to our YouTube channel and they can watch it at their leisure. Also, questions. We're going to try to make this as interactive as possible. I know that there is often quite a tendency to say, well, gee golly whiz, I have a question, but boy, there's a lot of people on here and I don't want to look like I don't know the answer to something that maybe I think I ought to know the answer to. We would invite you in real time here or at the end, but we would prefer you do it in real time. Put a question in the, what is it,
Yeah, there's a chat or a Q&A box. I'll be kind of keeping an eye on those and bringing them up as I see them.
Yeah, we won't expose your name. We won't say so-and-so had a really dumb question. Let's get at it. Just go ahead and please chime in a question. We will try to get those answered in real time. I think they'll not only make more sense to whoever asks the question in real time, but there's a lot of other people on this webinar, and I think it will help everybody maybe have a little bit better understanding, because I will almost guarantee you I'm not sure how many people we had register for this, but well over 100. I will almost guarantee you that if you have a question, there are several dozen other people that had the same question. So please be brave enough to ask the question. So here we go. Paige, if I can get the slides to change here? You want to kind of talk us through what we're going to be talking about today?
Yeah, so Dave kind of mentioned at the beginning of this call kind of how this Market Basics 101 class came to be. I don't know how many of you have sat through our Veg Oils 101, but that's kind of how, when we hire new people, when I started, we kind of go through the Veg Oils 101, and that was the one where I was like, I feel like there's a level below this, like those foundational building blocks that we're missing here. So that's kind of how we came up with this agenda. Hopefully these kind of building blocks here will help further learning, and like that Veg Oil 101 or that Veg Oil 201.
Or Scott's done some wheat.
Yeah, or
wheat 101 and 201.
We've done some wheat stuff. Hopefully the goal of this webinar is to give you those building blocks to kind of build on top of with some of those more advanced courses. So we're going to we call it Market Basics for a reason. So we're going to talk about what a commodity is, different planting dynamics, crop development, why we care about those, weather is going to play a big part in that, looking at supply and demand kind of as a whole, and again, why we care about that, what those different numbers mean. Is it too much? Is it not enough? How does that impact pricing, both domestically, and you have to look at it on a global scale as well. And then we'll go over hedging kind of high level, and then talk about kind of a lot of the reports that come out that we look at on a monthly and weekly basis. So, and again, a lot of this is going to be kind of the things that we look at, and then kind of trying to explain why they're important and why we need to look at them. So yeah, that's kind of the agenda, and hopefully we'll give you some good building blocks here.
So I wonder how many people, I guess we don't have to do a show of hands, that would be a little difficult, but if you haven't watched the 1983 movie, Trading Places, that's got Eddie Murphy in it, it's really a great movie. It's entertaining, it's funny, uh, but I've always long said that it should be required viewing for everybody, anybody that is in the commodity business. So I've got a couple clips in here to start with to try to help. The first part on the agenda item of, what is a commodity? So here we go. I laugh every time I see this clip, and I have seen it thousands of
We are here to try to explain to you what it is we do here.
We are commodities brokers, William. Now, what are commodities? Commodities are agricultural products, like coffee that you had for breakfast, wheat, which is used to make bread, pork bellies, which is used to make bacon, which you might find in a bacon and lettuce and tomato sandwich.
Oh, the look on his face. So what is a commodity? Well, this is a definition that I pulled out of, pulled it right off the internet, so it's got to be true, right? It's a raw material or primary agricultural product that can be bought and sold, such as copper or coffee. You can't actually grow copper, obviously, but I think when you look at commodities, we tried to look at this and put it in some very simple categories that make sense. And just about every commodity that is exchange traded that we or anybody else that we know of watches, it kind of falls into three general categories. You're familiar with a lot of the agricultural commodities, stuff we grow. The other category, and you can see the list there, I don't need to read it to you. Another category is a little bit of, I guess, tongue in cheek or a little bit of humor, but stuff we dig up, stuff that we get out of the ground, mined metals, certainly petroleum that we get up, natural gas that we get out of the ground. And then the third category is stuff that we make generally out of the stuff that we either got out of the ground or that we dig up. And if you look at that list, you got soybean meal and soybean oil. Well, soybeans is over on the left-hand list in the stuff we grow list. Most of what we do with soybeans in this country is we make them into meal, soybean meal and soybean oil. Don't really use a lot of them by themselves. Certainly when you look at West Texas crude, intermediate crude, that's the petroleum futures here in the US. We don't really use petroleum for anything by itself, but we make it into other stuff that we do use. We make it into diesel fuel. You can see the heating oil futures contract is what is used there, and unleaded gasoline. And so that's the, excuse me, the three general categories. Now you may notice that we have corn and crude oil in red. Why did we do that? One of the things that I wanted to point out here is we consider both of those what we term in the office here foundational commodities. Why are they foundational commodities? Well, I think if you look at the left-hand column, the stuff we grow, by volume, we produce more corn in the United States than pretty much everything else that we grow up out of the ground combined. Corn is generally our largest acreage-based crop here in the US. We get sometimes pretty close with soybean planting, but corn is the biggest, historically has been the largest acreage consumer, if you will, of crops. And therefore, so to some degree or another, so goes the price of corn, so goes just about everything else, at least the US grown crops in that list. And so most of the time when we're talking to a customer of ours about whether it's soybeans or soybean oil or some other or wheat, we're usually going to start the conversation by talking about corn, because you can't look at some of these other commodities in a vacuum without looking at what corn's doing, because that's the big ag product, as I mentioned, here in the US. Similarly with energy, maybe a little bit of some different reasoning here, but certainly that's very important because it is the baseline driver of just about everything we do. If you think about your life, if you think about the life of a farmer, just about everything that we do, whether it's turning on a light switch, whether it's, a farmer driving his tractor through the field or his combine, energy drives to a degree everything that we do. Therefore, it is an input, a cost input in just about everything that else that is on this list that is produced. So those are two commodities that, regardless of which other commodities on this list might be of importance to you, those are two commodities that you really probably shouldn't take your eye completely off of, regardless. So let's keep moving through this here. Let's talk a little bit about the ag commodities, because I suspect those are probably important to a larger number of the people on here. We're going to talk a little bit about the planting dynamics, crop development stages. Part of this is to familiarize you with kind of where we plant and grow stuff, not only in the US, but the rest of the world. But also, especially, I think, as we get in the crop development stages, that's where Paige will kind of chime in here a little bit and talk a little bit about more why weather is important. And weather is always important during the growing season, but it's always important. It's more important during the growing season. And even more specifically, there are times in the growing season when that crop having adequate amount of moisture is even more important to that crop. So we'll try to layer all that together for you. So made the comment that corn is the biggest crop we grow. These are actually USDA maps. You can find them for just about any crop, just about anywhere in the world that the USDA produces these. And basically the way to look at this is the darker the green, the higher concentration of that crop in that particular area. And you can see the USDA kind of busted up. It's not exactly, I guess it is busted up kind of by counties. But you could see the bigger producing states there. Iowa is certainly the biggest. You've probably heard us on some other webinars talk about the I states. We talk about the I states right through the middle of the Corn Belt: Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana. Now, Indiana's kind of off to the side a little bit. It's one of the bigger producing states, but if you look at corn and soybean production, kind of the big five are about the same. It's the three I states, it's Nebraska, and it's Minnesota. And some of the which one's first, second, and third might change around a little bit, but it's really not only weather is important, but it's weather in that part of the country that is the most important. But also look at this light green. We grow a lot of stuff in a lot of other areas. So this is obviously the most important concentration of corn areas, but it doesn't mean that some of these other parts of the country where we grow things are unimportant. So you kind of got to look specifically at the dark green areas, but then also don't forget to look at really the broader growing areas in the US. Here's your map for soybean production. You can see kind of the same big five states there: Illinois, Iowa, Indiana, Nebraska, and Minnesota. Another area that I should mention that has gotten a lot more important, really during, I've been doing this for a little bit over 40 years, and certainly in the last 20 to 30 years, is look up into the Dakotas. The concentration of acres of soybeans and corn that have expanded up into that region. That's been probably the biggest growth area, I would say, for corn and soybeans in the US, is up into those two states.
You want to explain kind of why stuff is grown here as opposed to growing corn in Nevada or Arizona or something?
Well, yeah, that's a good point. And I've had conversations with other people about, that relative to wheat, relative to a lot of other crops, canola. And I was asked the other day, well, why don't we plant more canola in some of these other states? Well, the answer to that question almost universally is going to come down to climate and soil. Different crop likes different soil types. Different crops have different moisture needs. That's a great question. I'm glad you asked that. Great little bit of trivia here. Somewhere kind of right up through here, where I'm doing the cursor right now, is it the I can't remember exactly on your globe which exactly meridian that is, but in the U.S. growing area, that part of the map kind of separates to the east of that. You generally get 30 inches of rainfall a year and more. And the further west, you get 30 inches of rainfall or less. It's not an accident when I show you the wheat map here in just a second. Matter of fact, I'm going to go to that one right now. Look at the wheat. This is hard red winter wheat out here, okay? Why do we grow so much hard red winter wheat out there and we grow corn and soybeans back here? It's not an accident. It's not custom. It's not, well, my daddy grew wheat, so I'm going to grow wheat. It's because we get less rain out there. It takes a lot more moisture. It takes a lot more rain every year to grow corn, especially, followed by soybeans. And then wheat takes a good bit less rain. So a lot, again, of the reasons that we plant different crops where we plant them is exactly that. It's the soil and it's the amount of moisture. Potatoes are another one. They like a different kind. Now, we're not potato experts by any stroke, but we do work with a lot of big companies that are potato processors. Potatoes like a different kind of soil still yet, as do all these other crops. So that's a great question, Paige. Thanks for asking that. Excuse me. So here's wheat production. If you look at the U.S. production of wheat, we really have three major types of wheat that we grow in the U.S. Now, there are others. There's, I think, 5 or 6. When Scott does his wheat webinars, you get a lot more detail on it. But generally, we got 3 types of wheat. The largest produced is hard red winter wheat. This is a lot of where we grow that. There is spring wheat. The winter wheats, by the way, get planted kind of October, November. They come up out of the ground. They go into dormancy. They will come back out of dormancy in spring when the weather warms up and it starts to rain a little bit. This is hard red winter wheat. A lot of these areas over here, we grow a lot of soft red winter wheat. Now, that is the 3rd largest wheat in the U.S. by volume. We grow it across a much broader area. And you have the spring wheats up here generally. Now, these kind of overlap. We'll have some hard wheat up a little bit further up here into the Dakotas. We get some, I think, spring wheat down into Nebraska. The reason that I mentioned this, and the reason that I mentioned that soft red winter wheat is grown over a broader area, one of the things you have to watch very closely is that when you have a crop that has got its acreage concentrated in a smaller area, it can generally be more susceptible to weather issues. And the reason I say that, when you look at corn and soybeans that you grow across a big chunk of the Corn Belt, there's always, or just about always, years where you have areas that are dry, but you also are spread over a lot greater geographic area. So not every place is usually dry. Some years you have a drought like that, but more often than not, you got bad weather here, good weather there, and to some degree or another, it'll offset itself. When you have a crop as concentrated as this spring wheat crop is up here, you get dry up in the northern plains of the U.S. and you can have a crop failure a lot easier because you have the acres concentrated in a much smaller area. Also, when I get into the hedging, just wanted to touch on this. We do actually have 3 different wheat futures contracts that are traded. Chicago wheat, which is the biggest by volume, is generally considered by the industry to be soft red winter wheat, which is not the biggest by volume grown. That's a whole nother 2-beer discussion that we won't get into today. You got the hard red winter wheat contract that used to be traded at the Kansas City Board of Trade, actually in Kansas City, that has been bought by the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. So here's a strange one for you. Kansas City wheat is traded electronically in Chicago. Enough about that. Spring wheat is traded at the Minneapolis Grain Exchange in Minneapolis. So enough about that. Let's look a little bit more broadly. The U.S. Midwest used to be called the breadbasket of the world. Maybe still retains that moniker, but really there's a lot of other places that have gotten here in the last 20 or 30 years that they have gotten to be much larger competitors. Matter of fact, the largest exporters of wheat in the world, the largest exporter is Russia. This is why the wheat market went vertical 3 years ago when the war in the Ukraine started, because there's a lot of wheat and a lot of corn, as I'll show you here in a minute, that is produced in that part of the world. There's the Ukraine. One of the things, just as a sidelight, that I think has surprised the market the most in the last 3 years believe this war started on the 27th, maybe, of February, the 22nd of February, back in 2022. Wheat prices went to well over $10 a bushel. They have come back down. And the big surprise here is just how good a job this part of the world has done of continuing to export wheat and other ag products. Believe it or not, in the middle of a war. Not this year, but the prior 2 years, Russia and the Ukraine together set records exporting wheat. Nobody would have expected that, but there's other parts of the world that weather's important and things like war are important. When you look at corn and soybean production, South America has been the big growth area. When it comes to soybeans, specifically Brazil, I'll get to that on the next slide, but U.S. is still the largest corn producer in the world, followed by China. Brazil, I believe, is number 3 on that list. So you can see corn production has grown pretty rapidly in really central Brazil. A lot of these acres here in Mato Grosso, Mato Grosso is the largest corn and soybean producing state in Brazil. We will start watching this, and if any of you watch our weekly key market driver slides during the South American growing season, and more on the timing of that here later in the slide presentation today, we'll start focusing on weather in other parts of the world. You'll hear Scott talking about weather in Russia and the Ukraine. We're talking about weather in the U.S. Corn Belt. The other half of the year, when we're in our winter, they're growing crops and we're looking at weather in the other hemisphere. This is why Argentina and Brazil especially have gotten to be big soybean producing states. Brazil actually passed the U.S., I think, in soybean production 3 or 4 years ago, 5 years ago, something like that. And this growth in soybean planted area in Brazil is something that has been I think long-term trend is probably an understatement. I say that because I've been doing this a little over 40 years, and this has been the trend for not the entirety of my career, but the better part of it, the expansion in a growing area down here. A little bit of a misnomer. People say, well, I got asked the question yesterday, well, is that because Brazil's cutting down rainforest to plant soybeans? Not exactly. It might be a little bit of that up here in the north, but really this is kind of what was pasture land, cerrado ground. It's kind of scrub grass and short trees. And they have been clearing that, I think moving cattle off of that, clearing that and planting soybeans to it. And that acreage, the annual increase of acres, wouldn't say they increase soybean acres every year, but boy, just about every year, Brazil increases soybean production. So,
yeah, so this is a lot of the reasons why we look at things on a global scale. I'm sure a lot of you on this call are like, well, I only buy US origin or Canadian origin product. Why do I care about what's going on in Brazil? There are some factors like government policy that only affects what goes on in the US, for example. I'm sure we're all living through that right now. But we still have to look at a global scale because all of that affects the markets that we're looking at. So that is why we're watching a lot of these global areas and weather and war and all of these things, because all of that impacts what's happening to the soybean or corn or wheat prices or whatever you're looking at. So that is why we're looking at stuff globally as well as domestically.
you know, that is an excellent point. I'm glad you called that out. I mean, early in my career, the U.S. had a lot larger share of global production, and you could get away a little bit more with watching just what was going on here. Today, this truly is a global market. South America in total, these two are the largest two producing states. They produce a lot more soybeans, certainly soybeans than we do in the U.S., and they're challenging us as the global corn production leader. So, yeah, that's very important. It's kind of like why you got to watch corn and crude oil, because that affects the price of everything else. Certainly what's going on weather-wise and others, government policy and biofuel policy specifically is the thing that has been probably roiled some of the veg oil markets the most here in recent years. These other countries also have biofuels policies and other policy issues that can affect global markets. So Yeah, good call out, Paige. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. So we have got the next 12 slides that we are not going to go through individually, I promise you, because that would be incredibly boring and people would probably be falling asleep. But the point that we want to make here, and by the way, these are USDA crop calendars that are also published by the USDA. They're free to anybody who wants to go on their website. But if you want to look at what's going on around the world in this month, what's going to be going on next month, and look at the different times of the year where things are important, this is a good set of maps to go through. The basic message here is that even though we think that, we got the growing season right now, then we get our crop harvested in, October, November, and then we can take the rest of the year off, right? Looking at weather? Nope. Because the other hemisphere is planting stuff. Also remember that you have spring planted crops and you have winter crops. We talked about the winter wheat crops here in the US that are planted in the fall. So a lot of the soft red winter wheat is actually planted after we take soybeans out. They'll plant a winter wheat crop over the winter in those same acres. You have winter wheat and you have spring planted wheat here. Russia and the Ukraine do the same thing. They have winter planted crops and they have spring planted wheat crops. In North America, primarily Canada, but also in the US, we plant canola, but we plant our canola in the spring. A lot of other parts of the world will plant their canola as a winter crop. So we're really watching weather in different parts of the world constantly. Also, if you are one of our veg oil customers watching this, we also watch weather down here quite a bit. Why? Well, that's Malaysia and Indonesia. They are the largest palm oil producers on the planet. And for those of you who may not know this, palm oil is by far the largest produced veg oil on the planet. Second is soybeans. Third is canola/rapeseed. So if you're a veg oil customer and you're buying soybean oil in the US, why are we watching the weather over here? Because if they have a weather-related production problem over here, it is going to affect the price that you pay for soy and canola up here. So a lot of interconnected variables here, but generally speaking, I'm not going to go through these, but really I want to look at this one in the next couple, because this is what is important here in the US. We are typically planting our spring planted crops kind of April, May. Some of that, especially for soybeans, might stretch out into the early days, first week or so of June. But it's really in April, May here where we are planting our crops. June is kind of that month, as we'll show you here in a little bit, where we're kind of getting the plants up and bigger. And then July and August are really, I would argue, the two biggest months here for the spring planted crops. July is the most important month for corn. August is the most important month for soybeans. And May, I kind of passed May up. I think Scott would tell you if he was sitting in here, he's kind of our resident wheat expert. May is probably the most important month for wheat production, winter wheat production. April, as that crop comes out of dormancy, but really it's the weather that you get in late April and May that are the largest determining factor of what your winter wheat crop is going to look like. So,
Do you want to, and I don't know if we're going to talk about this in crop development, but you said July was the most important month for corn.
Mhm.
Why?
That is a great question. Let's table that till we get to the crop development part, and we will talk about that. Typically harvesting our crops, the spring planted crop, we're harvesting our winter wheat crops as we speak. Matter of fact, we're a
Not
little
really,
bit late.
because it keeps raining.
Yeah, not really, because it keeps raining. Rain makes grain for the most part. That is true most of the time, except when the crop is done and you're ready to have it harvested. Rain is not always a good thing, and that's kind of where our winter wheat crops are right now. The spring planted crops, we typically harvest those. The two big harvest months are October and November here in the US and really across the whole Northern Hemisphere. So let's talk about crop development. And so what we've tried to do in this part of the presentation is to simplify this to make it understandable and also to apply it across really most of the crops that are grown. Okay. If you get with an agronomist, they talk about the different R stages of crop development. When this leaf comes out and the crop does that, that's a level of complexity that we would be glad to help you through. Probably a bit too far off into the detail ditch for this particular call, but to help you understand this, we've got these 7 basic stages of crop development. We've got to plant the crop. That's pretty self-explanatory. Germination, where the crop sticks its little head up out of the ground. We will talk about that. We will talk about some of the USDA reporting about the different stages and how they help us understand crops, not only state by state, but nationally, how those crops are coming up out of the ground, how they got planted, how they're coming up out of the ground, how they're looking. Stage 3, the vegetative growth stage, that's as the plant, it's not necessarily producing fruit yet. It's not making corn. It's not making soybeans. It's not making those little wheat kernels, but the plant has got to grow to maturity before it starts reproducing. And then those all important reproductive phases. And again, we'll talk about those specifically for some of the bigger crops, and that'll get into the why is July important, why is August important question that you asked, Paige. So the plant starts producing fruit, and then that fruit it's got to grow and it's got to fill out, and the plant actually will start filling. That's an important part of the growing season when it comes to moisture. We talked about there are times that moisture is more important than others. More on that later here as well. It ripens. An apple ripens on the tree. A pear ripens on the tree. Fruit does the same thing. The soybeans and the corn do that. That fruit matures. In the case of these crops, part of that is then drying down to a moisture that it can actually be harvested and stored. Then, of course, the last one is obvious as well. Harvest, that's when we actually pick it. So let's kind of go through these and we'll talk about it. So we got the planting season. We typically in the US will start planting corn about mid-April. There are crop insurance states that kind of limit to a degree how early you can start and how late you can plant. We don't want to get off into that detail ditch, at least on this call. Maybe that's another webinar for another day to talk about some of the details of crop insurance, but I want to put you to sleep pretty quick. What do we want from weather at this stage? Certainly, farmers like to have moisture in the ground. They don't particularly like to plant in the dust, as you can see in that bottom middle picture. First off, it's dusty, but really more important, to ensure that that plant has enough moisture to germinate and get up out of the ground, you're taking a bit of a risk if you're planting in the dust. Now, there's an old adage in that industry that says plant in the dust and the bins will bust. Well, that would imply good yields when you plant when it's dry. Well, sometimes that works out really well.
As long as it rains.
Yeah, sometimes it doesn't. To your point, planting in the dust means it's nice and dry at planting time, and a farmer can get his crop planted early. And usually that's a good thing. You'd like to have some moisture in the ground, then it dries out so the farmer can plant so that the plant has that moisture. The plant in the dust and the bins will bust adage simply speaks to the advantage of getting your crop planted early. So ideally, you'd like some moisture here, but certainly too much moisture isn't good because you can't drive these great big pieces of equipment.
I was going to say, you get your tractor stuck.
You get your tractor stuck, been there. At any rate, that's probably enough said about the planting part of it. The germination phase, and by the way, I guess I should back up here. The USDA, typically starting kind of mid-April, early April, they will start giving us a series of reports that come out at 3 p.m. Central Time on Monday afternoon, and they will tell us, they start in the beginning of April, they will tell us how the winter wheat crop is coming out of dormancy condition-wise, how the crop looks. And then when we start planting soybeans and corn, they will give us updates on planting progress, not only nationally, but they'll give us the state-by-state data. They'll tell us what percent planted each state we are. We've got what is planted in the ground as a percentage. They'll tell us where we were at the same time last year. They'll tell us what the 5-year average planting pace is for that time. So you can kind of keep up with kind of a scorecard, how you're doing, how the crop is going in the ground. They will start as we get out typically into May and the corn crop starts sticking its little head up out of the ground. They will tell us what percentage of these crops have emerged, what percentage of the U.S. crops have germinated, and that little green thing has started to come up out of the dirt. They will help us keep up with that. Again, also compared to long-term averages, also compared to how we were doing last year and last week. And then there's the vegetative growth stage. And this is a part of the growing season that I think a lot of people will kind of doze off a little bit, if you will, as it relates to weather. Not generally seen as quite as important unless it's just really, really dry. You know, you made the comment page when I said that, you know, planting the dust and the bins will bust. But it does have to rain at some point. Certainly these crops need moisture and they need nutrients. Those nutrients are in the soil. If it's really dry, the crop just won't develop and come up. But this is a time of year that as long as you have moisture in the ground, it's generally seen as maybe not quite as important. What is also important about this time of the year is this is the point in the plant development where not only is the plant growing this way up out of the ground and getting taller, but it's also growing that way down into the ground. It is amazing sometimes when you start looking at how deep, especially these corn plants, will put roots down in the ground. It'd be surprising.
It'd be interesting to pull one of those out this year just with how dang windy it's been.
Yeah.
Another thing that I was going to add, talking about soil moisture, there's topsoil moisture and then there's subsoil moisture. And for those of you that are our customers on here that get our KMD, this is what we call like the checking and savings account slides. So there's a little bit of a difference between topsoil moisture and subsoil moisture. You can kind of live without subsoil moisture as long as you have good topsoil moisture. So it's a little bit more than just looking at moisture as a whole. There are kind of different variants of it.
Yeah, that's a great point. The reason we actually label it, use the checking and savings account analogy, just like your checking and savings account, as long as you got a job and you're getting regular deposits of your paycheck in your checking account, you can live a decent life without much in savings. You just don't have any savings to fall back on if you stop getting your regular paycheck every week or every 2 weeks.
So that kind of plays into weather as a whole. Sometimes if like we would like it to be raining, but if you have good subsoil moisture, it maybe is not as big of a deal. But if you have no subsoil moisture and you're not getting any rain, that becomes a bigger issue. So a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, a lot of moving parts. If you got subsoil moisture, that crop can draw on that, even if you go through these periods in the summer that we seem to get every year where it doesn't rain quite as often as you'd like. So this is actually a Syngenta crop field right down the road. This particular year, this corn that you see was the seed crop that they were planting. They will plant a buffer crop on the edge where the irrigation doesn't get to. But this field is irrigated, so it looks pretty spiffy every year, regardless of the rainfall. Where rain starts to become more important is as you get into the reproductive phase. Corn particularly, the reproductive phase is a relatively narrow window. I think Bill would tell us if he was on the call with us here today that we typically hit about the 50% mark. The peak of pollination of the corn crop here in the U.S. is between the 10th and the 15th of July, depending on exactly when they got the crop planted that year.
So that goes back to Dave's earlier comment of July being the most important month for corn production.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for pointing that out. You see, this is when the corn crop starts throwing the tassels up here. This is the pollen. This is what they call the male part of the plant. And these are the silks down here. This is where that pollen is received. These plants will cross-pollinate. And then this is the ear that you can start to see here where the ear that is formed where the kernels are. Corn plants like it cool and wet. when they're pollinating. So if you get a heat wave or you get a dry spell, that's when the market will start to get nervous and you will typically see prices start to go up. July is the most important month for corn. Soybeans are a little bit different. Soybeans typically have a much longer reproductive phase. Corn is generally pollinating in this relatively narrow time window. The soybean plant will put these little flowers out. And then these flowers, if there is enough moisture, will turn into these little pods, and then the plant will fill these pods out. Here's a trivia bit for you, but corn, if you look at corn yields in the US, they can vary pretty significantly based on weather during this reproductive phase. The earlier weather is important, but not as important as weather during the reproductive phase. Soybean yields certainly vary relative to weather, but the variation is not nearly as large as a percentage. And the reason is soybeans have this longer reproductive phase. They can just kind of hang out and wait for moisture. They got a lot bigger tolerance level on the moisture. They can just wait longer. Soybean plants will typically start flowering. And by the way, the USDA also reports the percentage of the corn crop that's pollinating, the percentage that's tasseling, the percentage that's pollinating, the percentage of the soybean crop that is flowering, the percentage that is setting pods. And so we get a lot of updates from the USDA, but soybean plants will start. This is like a 10-day, 2-week process here. Soybeans will start setting pods here very soon, and they will, start putting flowers out, blooms very soon. And they'll do that all the way into sometimes even early September. So a lot broader spectrum, a lot broader time period. Once that crop is reproduced, then we gotta grow the crop out. We've got an ear of corn, we've got a soybean pod there that's got 3, sometimes 4, but usually 3 little pods in it. This is also a very important time of the year for moisture. You need that moisture for the reproductive phase. You also need that moisture to fill these ears out and to fill these pods out and actually produce fruit. One of the things with soybeans, and we'll point this out for any of you who have been on any of our crop tours, that soybean plant, I said, will continue to flower for actually a couple months. And those flowers at the top of the plant are the last flowers to produce. Typically late rainfall in August, often late August and early September. We had a farmer tell us a handful of years ago at our crop tour, he said that's the whipped cream and the cherry on top of the ice cream sundae, if you will. That's the difference between good soybean yields and great soybean yields, is often that moisture that you get very late in the year, often late to the point where it doesn't matter to the corn crop at all. But that late summer, early fall rainfall can often give you more soybean yields because of this, the pods here filling out and the little blooms turning into pods and turning into beans at the very top of that soybean plant. Then the crop ripens. How do you tell that it's ripening? Well, color's a big part of it. If you have a corn plant that is still green, and that ear, you see these ears pointing down right here? This isn't because we pulled them off. Now, we did pull the husks off of these, but for corn, you see the actual physical plant turning from green to tan, but those ears will also fall over and flip over and point down. Another interesting point here, this is one of the reasons that when you talk about rain at harvest, we don't like rain at harvest because you get your tractor stuck. We don't like rain at harvest for wheat crops because you can have some fungus form and you can have the little kernels sprout. We don't like a lot of rain, certainly a lot of wind for soybeans, because as those plants dry out, those pods get brittle. You can bust the beans out, the pods will fall out, or the beans will fall out of the pod onto the ground, and then you can't pick them up. Corn is one of those plants that is pretty darn tolerant of some lousy weather as you get into the fall harvest. And the reason is this ear will turn over, instead of pointing up, will point to the ground. And now we've pulled the husk off, the covering off of this so you could see the ear, but it's covered by that. So corn has its kind of its own little umbrella. Corn has also got a thicker skin on it, a thicker hull. And so it doesn't take up moisture into the actual seed as fast when it's raining. It also doesn't shed moisture as fast as a soybean will. When you look at the soybean crop, you can see this field up here is starting to turn. By the way, the USDA will also report to us on a weekly basis what percentage of the crop is dropping leaves. But you can see as this crop starts to turn yellow, then it will start to drop leaves. Rough rule of thumb that I was taught a long time ago. When you're driving by a soybean field, once you start to see that first little hint of yellow in that field, unless it rains a lot, that crop will be ready to harvest in about 2 weeks. So, and of course, then there's the harvest part of it. Running a little bit behind here, so I'm going to kind of get into this a little bit. How do you look at commodities? Well, specific commodities are different, but one unit of measure that is probably watched the most universally is ending stocks. And then what percentage of total use of that crop does that ending stocks number represent? Why do we look at it that way? Well, for crops that we're planting once a year in North America, what do you got left in the cupboard waiting for a new crop? If the cupboard is bare, it means, boy, we better have a good harvest coming. If you got quite a bit left over from last year, maybe yield isn't quite so important. But when you look at these crops, I like to look at crops and look at ending stocks and put them in 4 distinct categories. Tight, where you don't really have much left. That's kind of like years like this. This is very problematic because you just don't have enough to go around. So it's tight. It's adequate, which is enough, but not a whole lot of extra. In other words, we better get harvest going here pretty quick and we better have a good crop. Then it's ample. That's where you start to get comfortable. And then there are burdensomely large supplies where the market starts to get cheap to encourage additional demand. And you can see all those on here, trying to figure out that what we call the Goldilocks zone. Where is that? This is kind of the difference between above that red line, below is tight. This is kind of adequate. Up here, you start to get into ample, and this is kind of your burdensomely large supplies up here. This one's wheat. When you look at this as a stocks to use ratio, different crops are different. Soybeans, the difference between tight and adequate is probably around 5% of use. If you got to 4 times that, 20% of use on wheat, you have an extraordinarily tight market. So it really does depend on the market itself. Here's your Goldilocks zone for corn. You start getting much below 9 or 10% of use, you're kind of getting pretty tight, like some of these years back here. You get over 9 or 10% of use, you're kind of in the ample range, and these are certainly burdensomely large stockpiles up here.
Can you explain what a stocks to use ratio is?
Yeah, that's a great point. What a stocks to use ratio is, and there's a lot of numbers on here, but basically what we do is we look at in bushels, how many bushels do we have left at the end of the year? And what you're looking at is corn right here. Okay, so let's go to this right-hand column. This is a forecast that would indicate that this is Bill at AES. This is the USDA's forecast. Okay, but the forecast is that we will have 2.3 in this case billion bushels of corn left at the end of the year. We are using either feeding to animals, eating for food, making into ethanol, or exporting. We have about 14.4 billion pounds of use. You simply divide your ending stocks by total use, and you say, I get about a little over 16% of use. That is what your stocks to use ratio is. We not only look at these things in total bushels, we also look at these things as a percent of use. That's your stocks to use ratio. Hopefully that made some sense. The major takeaway I want you to take away with here is 16% stocks to use in corn a lot? Yeah, that's kind of starting to get burdensomely large, certainly at least ample, if not burdensomely large. If you had 16% of use, like I mentioned in wheat, you are out. Now, that's a whole nother discussion for another day of why that is, but just know that different crops, different numbers here will determine how tight that crop is. Not every stocks to use for every crop is the same.
And these are old spreadsheets, just so we're.
Yeah. This is
current representation of.
Right, this is for educational purposes only. We'd have to reprint the textbook every 30 days to keep them current. As you might suspect, the larger your stocks to use, the cheaper prices are. And the lower your stocks to use as markets get tight, the more expensive stuff is. When you don't have much of something and it's scarce, the price is higher. When you have plenty, this is a scatter diagram of past years, and you can kind of see how it's not perfect. There are always sometimes other stuff going on. Why did we have years when we had this much corn here and prices were still high? Well, remember earlier we talked about we grow a lot of corn in other parts of the world, and they might have had a problem. China is the second largest producer of corn on the planet. They are the largest consumer of corn on the planet because they have the largest hog herd on the planet. Might have a good crop here and plenty of supplies, but if they have a problem, weather problem, prices will be elevated. So that's why you have these outlier lines. But generally speaking, this is how we kind of look at, and most of the analyst community looks at, what do we think we have, and therefore where should prices be? Hopefully that made some sense.
Yeah, and that's kind of just how the market works itself, is if we have too much supply, the price is going to go down to encourage more demand, and then vice versa. So that's kind of what he means by that.
Yeah, not only encourage more demand, but it might try to discourage quite as many acres the next year.
Right.
Right. And you have all these other crops that are competing for those acres. Hence my comments about watching what corn's doing.
Exactly.
If we got plenty of corn, price of corn goes down, farmers might go, plant a few more acres of this or a few more acres of beans or whatever. So that's how all this stuff fits together. We don't want to get too far off in the detail ditch on hedging because we're just about out of time, and because this is, again, another topic maybe for another day. We've got another video clip from the Trading Places movie for you. Whoops, what did I do there? Here we go. Let's try this again.
And then there are other commodities like frozen orange juice and gold. Though, of course, gold doesn't grow on trees like oranges. Clear so far?
Yeah.
Good, William. Now, some of our clients are speculating that the price of gold will rise in the future, and we have other clients who are speculating that the price of gold is going to fall. They place their orders with us, and we buy or sell their gold for them.
Tell them the good part.
The good part, William, is that no matter whether our clients make money or lose money, Duke and Duke get the commissions.
Well, what do you think, Valentine?
Well, it sounds to me like you guys are a couple of bookies.
I told you he'd understand.
Oh, I don't know why I giggle every time I see that. So let's talk very briefly about hedging. And again, I told you that this movie should be required viewing if you're going to be in the commodity business. Another good book. It's just titled Futures. And it's not only a good book, but it's also an interesting read because it talks about the history of these commodity derivative exchanges, how they came to be, a lot of the personalities that caused them to be. It's a good read. It'll give you a lot of good history. And again, the personalities kind of keeps it interesting. But why did these exchanges form, and why do we use these financial instruments? A lot of people tell me, well, isn't this just a casino by a different name? And it really isn't. These exchanges started because farmers grow stuff, food producers consume and use stuff. They need supplies of these different products. But how do those markets come together? And almost all of these exchanges started as a location, many of them were in Chicago, where the different parties that were either producing a commodity or consuming a commodity would come together to exchange things, to exchange their commodities and agree on a price. They got to a spot where, it's one thing to bring your wares to the market and look for a buyer in a specific part of these streets in Chicago where they would exchange these things. But then somebody came up with the idea of, look, rather than just pulling my wagon here with these supplies and like a farmer's market trying to sell them, I'm going to have stuff to sell this harvest. I'm going to have more to sell. And some of these customers that I have might have things that they're going to need in the future. Why can't we forward contract? And that was the beginning of the futures exchange. Just as a brief background, these things turned into standardized contracts, standardized quality, standardized number of bushels, and so that they could be exchanged very easily because they are very fungible commodities. If you buy corn futures, it's the same corn no matter who is on the other side. It's the same grades and quality with the same discounts if it's not of that specific quality. So why do we use these? Well, again, we use them. We do commodity risk management. We don't speculate. Not that there's anything wrong with speculation. There's a role for the speculator. A little bit more on that in a second. But we use these financial instruments as a way to alleviate risk. What am I talking about? Well, if you work for a big, for example, CPG company or a restaurant chain, you're going to need, let's say, soybean oil to go into the fryer to produce your French fries or whatever you're doing, whatever else you're making in the fryer. You're going to need that. You're going to need some this month to ship to your restaurants so you can keep your restaurants open, but you're also going to need some this December. And you can actually use these financial instruments. Even you might not be able to find somebody to sell it to you for this December or next March, but you can certainly use one of these financial instruments to offset that risk in the meantime. A little bit of trivia, typically soybean oil, for example, and most of the other ag commodities are similar, about 92 or 3% of the price changes that you will experience will be represented by the underlying change in the futures contracts. That's why these instruments are so good to hedge that risk, because you can get most of the job done with that derivative instrument. We also get from the USDA 15 major reports every year in the grains and oilseed space. Now there's cattle reports and there's other reports on eggs and everything else and dairy products. We're just going to focus here on the USDA reports for the grains and oilseeds. Not all reports are created equal. Every month of the 12 months, the USDA will give us their updated balance sheets. That's the WASDE. You know what WASDE stands for, Paige?
World Agricultural Supply and Demand Estimates?
Yep.
Nice.
There you go. Great work. So we get 12 of those every year. At the end of March, the USDA tells us how many acres they think U.S. farmers are going to plant. The end of June, actually, it's next Monday, the 30th. You can see how important that report is. More on this chart in a minute. How many acres U.S. farmers actually did plant by their estimation. And they will also give us 4 quarterly stocks updates. They update the what is the checking account balance, if you will, allow that analogy, 4 times a year. December 1st, March 1st, June 1st, September 1st. Now you may say, well, that adds up to more than 15. Now they combine some of them. Next Monday, we will get the final acreage numbers from the USDA and the quarterly stocks report. And so that's why there's 15 of them. What you see here is, and this is for corn, what you see here is what is the average in cents per bushel price movements on report day. This gives you an idea of the importance of a report. This is the big one coming up on Monday. It's the most important report of the year for corn, at least if you measure it by price volatility that the report can cause. I think it's in the number 2 hole for soybeans and the number 3 hole for wheat. So got a big report coming at us next week. So we've thrown a lot of stuff at you here today. We hope it's been useful. You know, what do they use all this information for, Paige? Why is this important?
Because that's what impacts price. All of these things are kind of everything that we have to watch here on honestly a daily, monthly, weekly basis to figure out how it's going to impact the market, where prices are going, and kind of things like that. So I think the name moving parts is probably a pretty good one.
Yeah, and not to pitch our services, but what we try to do is help you make sense of all this. Sometimes weather's important, other times not quite so much. certainly like right now, government policy is very important. Other times, not many changes in that. And there's a lot of things going on. And what we try to do for our customers is really kind of help pick through this mountain of information. The amount of information available is not the problem. It's actually the sorting process. And then more importantly, trying to understand, okay, what do I do with this? And how do I use this information and these financial instruments together to try to offset some of the risk that we have?
And what do they all mean?
Yeah. What is all that? Yeah. What does it all mean, and why is it important to me? Where are the risks in front of me? Also, we've got what we term a beers in the back. We will have a discussion that we will post on our YouTube channel actually next Monday afternoon. That will be a discussion of what the USDA told us on that report. So,
Which, remember that chart that Dave just showed you, that is the most important report.
yeah.
Definitely on corn, and like you said, for soybeans and wheat to a lesser extent, but still a very, very important report. So
So there you go. That's what we've got for you here today. We hope that this was useful. Paige, you see any questions pop up at all?
I am not.
All right, we'll give you another little bit here. If you got a question, go ahead and type it in real quick. And if not, as we always say at the end of all of our calls, be careful out there. Thanks for joining us.